You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I am Kirk Mona, and I am joined today by Rachel Ginza and Victoria Thompson. We are all professional naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm so excited to be here this week. Kirk, I get to start us off this week. And Kirk, I believe I actually texted you when I found out about my topic this week. It was one of those. I did. It was one of those moments where I think I texted our group chat actually.
Oh, I see. I thought you were saying you texted me what the topic was. I
absolutely
remember that.
You
did. I got a text from you. You were like, I just found the topic.
Exactly. And boy, howdy. I'm excited.
Okay. Lots of excitement.
So, Kirk, tell me, as a naturalist, what do you know about lakes and rivers?
How much time you got?
That's very fair. I know it's a weird question, right?
What a question.
Right? What a question.
Yeah,
because you and we live in the land of over 10,000 lakes. We have a major river that flows through the entirety of most of our state.
Several, yeah.
Yeah. So we truly teach about lakes and rivers all the time, all year round.
Yep.
But what do you know?
Walk
What
on
are
the
some
lake
of the
in the
basics?
winter, drill holes through it, do all kinds of stuff.
Exactly. What are some basics that you know about lakes and rivers, Kirk?
Oh my gosh. They are bodies of water.
Mm-hmm.
One is generally considered to be self-contained, being the lake, although they can have, inflows and outflows. Rivers often will connect up to the lakes, and rivers are a body of water that's more of a linear flowage, draining a watershed. Often the river may start at a lake and drain the lake to far away locations.
Right.
How's that?
Fabulous. Now, do you know where you find lakes and rivers, Kirk? Where do you find those?
On Earth, Rachel?
All right.
On the ground?
Oh, on the ground, you say.
My first instinct, actually, when you asked the question, was to say in low spots, right?
Good.
But low spots is, of course, relative. You can have what are called hanging lakes, which are lakes that are perched up above a much higher level than the surrounding water. Basically, any sort of shallow bowl that can fill with water where it doesn't easily and quickly drain out, you can get a lake. So it doesn't have to be the lowest spot in an area, but generally, depressions, I would say.
All right. Now, what if I were to tell you, Kirk, that
I'm
while
so worried about where this is leading.
everything that you just said is true and very valid.
Right.
Lakes and rivers
However,
also can be found underneath the ocean, SpongeBob style.
Okay. Is this like a depend how you define? I mean, there definitely are there are rivers that flow in terms of like currents and things under the water, but are you talking about like a freshwater river in the saltwater ocean?
No, I am not.
Okay,
I'm talking about like a legit, like little, there are lakes and there are rivers underneath the ocean at the seafloor.
That's not the first thing that would have come to mind.
Right? Right.
Obviously it wasn't. So what do you...
It's wild.
I'm curious if this is sort of like a pedantry type thing where like we call it a lake and a river, but it's something different, or if it's something even more mind-blowing. So
little bit, but it also like blew my mind. So biggest question, how does this work, right? Because it's underneath the water. It's underneath the ocean. So there's already lots of water.
In water. How do you make
water
a
in water, and it looks like SpongeBob style, like an actual river with its own bounds and everything. So we're going to break it down.
Makes no sense.
Makes absolutely no sense. It comes down
unless
to...
this involves melting glacial water.
Ooh, sometimes. So
okay.
It does come down to the geography and the composition of the sea floor.
Mm-hmm.
This often occurs where major rivers exit land and go into,
and into
the
the
ocean. That is part of it as well. But most of it is at the sea floor, underneath all of the sand that's there and the sediment on the top of the sea floor. There are layers of salt.
So subterranean, sort of?
Yeah. So underneath that layer, the layers of like sand in the seafloor is thick layers of salt. And seawater actually seeps up through those layers of salt. And as they're seeping up through the layers of salt, they actually are dissolving some of that salt, making it have a saltier content than the seawater above it, which makes it denser because it has more salt in the composition. So that water is denser than the surrounding water.
So this is very different than where you were saying like water from a river is going in. Is this water that is under this layer originally came from like where rivers were coming in? Or are those two
I will
totally
explain that.
things?
There's two kind of related effects for it. So,
but basically the idea is we have sort of super salty water that's not really mixing with the regular salt water in the ocean.
Because it's denser.
I'm with you.
So it settles then in low spots on the seafloor. And eventually it does form like a river or a sea or a lake with its own boundaries.
A hyper saline lake.
Exactly. But it's just underneath the water.
Cool.
A lot of the time it also will mix up with the sediment and silt, which actually gets in the underwater rivers case, it actually mixes up with the sediment and silt and carries that along its path, which is really important because a lot of animals actually depend on the nutrients that flow along those river paths. It's wild.
Oh, for sure.
But because it is denser than the water above it, and it's in the lowest part of the seafloor, it causes that lake or river to have its own shoreline. They even have their own wave patterns. That are separate
water waves.
That are separate from the water above it.
Whoa. Okay, this is cool.
It's so cool. So there's a variety of there are ample examples of this phenomenon happening. One example that's huge is the Monterey Canyon. We didn't know about this until like the 1980s. But the thing is, it's 2 miles below the surface of the Pacific. So it's off the coast of California. Oof, and this particular canyon has a silty sediment saltwater river flowing through it. And it flows about 200 miles.
Okay.
But there are other rivers that have been documented that we're still finding and exploring that are thousands of miles long.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. I suppose it's not as easy as finding a river on land because you can't just
absolutely
look and go,
not.
There it is.
No, not at all. We didn't even know they existed until the 1980s when scientists started to map the seafloor. They were using sonar at the time. So we didn't even know until the 1980s. And in fact, I don't know if you know about this, you feel like a type of person who would know about this. There's actually estimations that, so Greenland had like the cabling system for something, I think the electrics or something in 1929. Something took it out. And scientists now think it was probably an underwater river that took out the sea cabling.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, these are important because like above ground rivers, they carry the sediment and nutrients often from river deltas like the Amazon or Mississippi. So oftentimes those are like the starting places and they'll continue on in little canyons and everything because underwater rivers, while they do have that in some ways, shapes and forms, they do have that seepage with the denser salt water. It also does occur where fresh water and seawater combine or like where they meet because the fresh water is less dense than the salt water. So it does cause that to happen.
I think that's
well.
part of what I had heard before was
Mm-hmm.
that, rivers can continue out a ways.
Mm-hmm.
This reminds me of the story that I did quite a ways back about the life that has been discovered under the ice shelves in
Exactly.
Antarctica. And they found that one of the things you have to have is currents that are
Mm-hmm.
bringing nutrients in. And so I can imagine and that was just like sort of just general currents, but if you have an area with a strong nutrient-rich current, that's just going to attract all kinds of wildlife and
Oh, it
things
does.
there's a lot of life that they're basically filter feeders where they can't go out and seek out their own,
Right.
food.
They
They have to
found
wait for
so
something to
many
come on
mussel
by.
colonies. Yeah, there's so
Yeah, I
many
bet.
mussel colonies along these types of rivers.
Cool.
So it's super cool. Not only that, but these rivers that I've just described to you, they don't always flow. Sometimes
Oh,
they stop.
okay.
They stop
Is
and
that
start.
problematic?
It can be, but it's usually okay. But it makes it very hard for scientists to study them.
Sure.
So what I was seeing was it takes an event like something like an earthquake or like an avalanche. It's similar to that type of event to get the sediment and water flowing. And once that happens, it can flow for weeks, months, years, and then just stop after the momentum goes away. So that makes it really hard for scientists to study. But those who have been studying this phenomenon, so the scientists who have been studying this phenomenon truly have had a hard time trying to figure out from the fact that they start and stop and finding the locations of these rivers. But that's not the only thing they have to deal with. They've actually lost equipment because
there's that much of a current.
There's that much of a current. Like there was one
Wow.
piece of equipment. This happened to them twice, actually. Some scientists had a piece of equipment. It was a ROV, and it was a fixed placement. So it was attached to a tripod.
Remote operated vehicle?
Yeah. That was attached
Gotcha.
to like a tripod to study the current and the turbidity
That's not
of the
stay
river.
there.
Well, they thought it would because the tripod that it was attached to weighed imperial ton, which I believe is 1,000 pounds. Right?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they attached it there. And here's the thing.
Oh.
This was a small flow, and it was clocked at 12 miles an hour, and it took this device 3 miles from where they put it.
Wow.
They found it buried under mud, and it weighed a ton. And not only that, but like it was like bent out of shape, and parts of it had been ground down and everything. They actually lost another. Isn't it crazy? And not only that, but they also found this happened to them again, same type of setup, and they found it 4 miles from where they set it. So this is crazy strong for a river. Like you say, I said 12 miles an hour, but that doesn't give justice for how powerful.
But that's pretty fast. I can't walk that fast even.
I can't either, but yeah. So these are like strong currents underneath the ocean, and we can't even tell that they're happening by looking at the surface. It's wild, and we truly have barely scratched the surface of this phenomenon.
Was that a pun, Rachel? That was awful.
It might have been a pun.
I do have a question for you though.
Yeah.
You said something earlier that we sort of skimmed over, but I'm sure some listeners might be going, wait a minute. You said that rivers come in, and it sounded like you said that fresh water is denser than salt water. But salt water is denser than fresh water. So how is fresh water getting down to the bottom of the ocean and causing
it's not, but
rivers?
That is not what I meant. Salt water is very much denser than fresh water, but because the fresh water is flowing above it, it creates like a separation between the fresh water and the salt water underneath the fresh water. If that makes sense. So there's the salt water, there's a barrier where like they aren't mixing at all. And then on top of it is the fresh water. And the salt water will flow separately from the fresh water.
Okay, but does that somehow drive a current for like the river underground, under the water?
It does not. But it does bring in some of the sediment.
Oh, it's just for the nutrients.
A lot of it is the nutrients and stuff. And that's just where it kind of starts. The water
and the current. It's just that the nutrients coming in probably precipitating out of that flow and then getting caught up in a completely separate deal.
Exactly.
Well, probably too, if you have a river is going to outflow in a low spot in the land, and that rift, low spot probably continues under the water as well. I see. Okay, I thought it was somehow that water was actually like sinking down, and I'm like, gosh, that shouldn't happen. Okay, so probably the nutrients are sinking down and getting caught up in totally different river system.
Exactly.
Very cool.
It's very cool. But yeah, I found out about this earlier this week and was like, welp, I know what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's what I have for you this week. Underwater rivers and lakes. It's wild. My sources were a BBC article by Richard Gray, Ocean Today by NOAA, PBS, and Ripley's Believe It or Not, which actually had some really solid information. So,
sweet.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, Kirk, can't wait to see what you got.
You'll find out.
In a world where the tiniest elements make the biggest impact, where curiosity leads to groundbreaking discoveries, it's time to delve deeper than ever before. Welcome to Under the Microscope, the podcast that zooms into the captivating world of materials and nanoscience. With each episode, you meet a scientist working in the field of materials or nanoscience. On Under the Microscope, the scientist candidly talks about their career journey, their favorite research experiment, and their 3 wishes to improve the world. Check out Under the Microscope on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Rachel, I need both your help and a laugh. So I want you to do the following.
Okay.
I want you to place your tongue firmly against the roof of your mouth, like right behind your back teeth, and anchor it there so you aren't tempted to cheat.
Okay. Now, when you say like the back of my mouth or the back of my teeth, you mean the back of my front teeth or like my top teeth or bottom teeth?
Stick your tongue to the top of your mouth so you can't move it.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And now what I want you to do is I want you to, as clearly as possible, without moving your tongue, say the following sentence.
Oh, no.
You are listening to the Strange by Nature podcast.
You are listening to the Strange by Nature podcast.
I mean, not bad.
My tongue definitely moved a little bit.
Yeah, right? I mean, you almost can't not, right? Because it's such an important part of language. It's just a really basic test, but it shows one of the many ways that tongues are important. And this week, I want to talk about tongues. And believe me,
poor search history, Kirk. Why?
They are weird.
Are you talking about like human tongues or tongues in general?
All of them, Rachel. So we believe tongues evolved about 350 million years ago.
Wild.
So that's a long time. This is actually kind of tough to nail down because soft tissues like tongues often don't fossilize. But the evolution of tongues probably occurred because of a new selective pressure on animals at that time. And Rachel, I'm going to put you on the spot, and listeners at home, you can play along as well.
Okay.
Can you guess what changed? What was the new pressure that drove the evolution of the tongue?
Ooh.
Something was happening about 350 million years ago.
Okay. 350 million years ago. Let's see. About that point in time, wasn't it the Cambrian explosion? Or was that about when the dinosaurs started?
Cambrian explosion was like 500 million years ago.
Oh, okay.
So we have, much after that.
Because I feel like that's around the time dinosaurs started showing up. Well,
this would be the Carboniferous period.
Carboniferous?
Um,
Okay, so there's a lot more plants. There's more ferns and things at that point in time. Um, more leafy greens? Would the pressure be like the need of communication and like socialization?
Good guess.
Or
it maybe has to do with those plants in a weird way.
Like people or like animals needing to eat?
Definitely not people.
Flat things?
Okay. Well, yeah, I think you're honing in on
Leaves?
it. We believe
Leaves.
this is around when tetrapods, vertebrate animals, started to come
Coming
on
on
the
land. Aha!
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking
So
about land, so
there you go.
okay.
So when you're in the water, like say a fish, right? You're going to use suction to help you swallow food.
Right.
And water works really well. You just kind of like slurp it in and pushes the food down. But air, pardon the joke here, but air sucks at sucking. It isn't viscous enough to
That's
push
terrible.
food down, right?
No, not at all.
These animals, it's hard to say, possibly had gills. So like this might not be an issue, but if you had lungs, literally inhaling your food can also be fatal. So not the greatest way to get food into you.
As someone who's done that, bad times.
Yeah, aspirating. So researchers speculate that animals came to land, grabbed food, and then maybe carried it back to the water where they could actually swallow it.
Right.
And over time, those that evolved, and we're talking over millions of years here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like amphibians and everything starting off with
absolutely, yeah. Think like salamanders too, like starting part of their life in the water and then they're on land. We may be seeing sort of a recreation of that that development there. But the idea is that over time, those that evolved a tool in their mouths to help actually shove food down their throats were able to just stay on the land, which is a big advantage because there's a lot of unexploited food on the land that no one else is eating.
So you have more variety for your diet if you can eat all that stuff.
Exactly, and less competition. It's all about exploiting areas with less competition. So it seems that both having a tongue and being a terrestrial vertebrate like we are, basically go hand in hand. They've probably almost always existed together, which is a pretty cool thing. And being that tongues have been around for such a very long time, it isn't any surprise that there is an incredible variety of tongues out there. And Rachel, some of them are just bizarre and strange. I'm not even going to talk about all the colors and stuff, right?
Oh my goodness.
We've talked on the show about how a salamander's tongue can be almost as long as their body, but many members of the amphibian class also have what's actually called ballistic tongues. They don't just stick them out like we can do, but they actually ballistically explode.
Yeah, it's like a flip thing too.
Yeah,
right?
But not even like a flick. It's a totally different thing that we can't even do. It's such an explosive burst. It's a different mechanism. There's even one, it's a salamander, I believe, where it actually goes so far out of their mouth that like some of the bones of their jaw, like extend out of their mouth with it. That's how far out it's extending. So this isn't just sticking out your tongue fast. This is a whole other thing, right?
That's wild.
Yeah, and they're doing this to catch prey. So there's all kinds of cool physics and biology at play that actually allow those tongues to stick to and then retrieve their prey. And I mean, look, I can pick up like popcorn with my tongue or something, but that's not the same as what's going on with these animals.
We're not effective at that, right?
No. So likewise, in the retrieval category, we have woodpeckers. And as a giant bird nerd, I think woodpecker tongues are amazing.
They're pretty cool.
First of all, they're very long, but they have these hard keratin tips that are actually barbed like a series of fishing hooks. And I think people think of woodpeckers just pecking into a tree and grabbing insects with their beaks. That's what I think most people, your average person probably assumes happened.
Right.
But the beak is just there to make the hole. And then they put their tongue into that hole. And what they're looking for when they're making these holes in the tree is they're looking for tunnels that bark beetle larvae have made under the bark of the tree. And when they find one of these tunnels, they can stick their tongue through the hole into the tunnel, turn at a 90-degree angle, and then dart around down in that tunnel, hoping to spear a larva and pull it out. which is
oh my God.
so weird and so super
I didn't
cool.
know
And
that.
something that we don't assume is going on. And if you're out in the forest next time, Rachel, and you find a tree where the bark is falling off, and you can see all those crazy designs, those little galleries that are made by bark beetles,
I'm just
they're
gonna
actually
picture
trying to make holes.
Oof. I'm just gonna picture like a woodpecker tongue following that tunnel.
That's what they're doing, right? They're trying to find intersect one of those tunnels so they can stick their tongue down that tunnel. So, wow, super cool. Speaking
goodness.
of, something like that with these long tongues and finding food in mammals, we have anteaters who also have very long tongue.
Yeah,
now,
when
according
you were
to the Guinness Book of World Records,
when you were talking about the woodpecker, my brain went, oh, kind of like anteaters.
exactly. And according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the giant anteater has a 2-foot long tongue. That's 61 centimeters, which is pretty crazy. But whenever you talk about animals, keep in mind that that's like the record setting. Like someone once found one that had a 2-foot long tongue. About a foot and a half would be more average for the giant anteater. But apparently
that's still
they can
so
get
long.
2 feet long. And we say 2 feet, and you go, oh yeah, okay. Get on a tape measure sometime and measure out 2 feet and just ponder that there's animals with tongues that long. Yikes.
My God.
Wow. So tongues have also evolved in other weird ways. They probably started out helping to swallow, but then in the case of the woodpecker or amphibians and anteaters, they were used in some way to help grab prey. But in snakes, they don't do that. They evolved to smell prey, which is so different than other animals.
That
Snakes
is
actually
very
pick
different.
up scent molecules on their tongue. And then when they bring that tongue into their mouth, they put that little forked tip into 2 sensors in the roof of their mouth, little holes called the Jacobson's organ. And it can analyze the scent molecules on their tongue. And it's so sensitive, it can actually determine if there's more scent molecules on the left tip of the tongue or the right tip of the tongue, and therefore determine the direction the smell was coming from, meaning like what direction their prey is in, just based on how many molecules hit each side of their tongue. Their tiny little tongue. That's why they're constantly flicking their tongues out, is they're trying to smell their environment. So it just blows my mind that in this time that since the tongue kind of came to be, and the tongue evolved from like muscles that were in the mouth of fish, basically, and they weren't. They weren't like you wouldn't recognize them as a tongue at all, right?
Right. They're not.
They
They're
clearly
there.
have a use. I think they actually are used to help create some of that suction that draws the water in when they're trying to feed. But the fact that has now turned into this thing that snakes can use to detect the direction smells are coming from.
Right.
Like, mind blowing.
Yeah.
So cool. Now, humans, we can't catch things with ballistic tongues. We don't have barbed tongues for spearing insects, thankfully. We don't smell with our tongues, but we do use our tongues a lot.
Yeah, we do.
Like other animals, we use our tongues for eating and for swallowing. And just like some other animals, we also use it for communication. A tongue is critical to correctly form the diverse sounds we make. And this is something humans have really mastered and taken to a higher level. You demonstrated that nicely at the beginning by not being able to move your tongue correctly. We can't make the sounds that sound correctly. Like we don't just make sounds in our throats. Some animals will just kind of make like a throat sound, like a tone. But we use our tongue to help shape those basic notes. So the shape of our mouth makes the vowels, and then our tongue, also along with our lips, helps shape the consonants.
Right.
And sure, we couldn't swallow food without our tongues, but I think it's really cool that they also help us communicate. They help us to have a podcast, right?
Right.
Tongues
we couldn't
are
do it
amazing.
without our tongue.
Yeah. I will note we also, tongues can used for other things that are arguably very important to humans too, but it's a family show, so we're going to pass on right by the last thing they can be used for. So anyways, sticking with the human tongue for a moment, it isn't just used for swallowing, but also for tasting. And that shouldn't be thought of as a side thing. Like taste is super important. We can, of course, taste the 5 basic tastes, the sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is sometimes described as savoriness. But I also like to include the bonus ones, not just those five. Some people include hot and cold as being important, and I would totally have to agree. Hot French fries taste very different than cold French fries.
Right.
We also have other sensations the tongue can detect, such as spiciness. And even in
Love
some
spiciness.
cuisines, not so much around here, but numbness is also a thing that's used in foods, and kind of that numb sensation.
Okay.
And now some people argue that those last four things are that word I just used, a sensation and not tastes. And yes, sure, if you want to break my apart like that, that's fine. But they're all important nonetheless. Now, I do have to do a little side rant here. Okay, Rachel?
Beautiful.
Because
I'm ready.
some listeners will have seen this tongue map where it's like, you taste salty here and sweet here and bitter here. Right? I'm here to tell you that is complete and utter nonsense. It used to drive me crazy. When I worked for the Girl Scouts, we'd have one of the try-its you would do with Brownie Girl Scouts, which they don't do anymore. You would have, they had in there, make a taste map of your tongue and, get some, like, I forget where they were, but like put, sugar on the tip of your tongue. And it's, I can taste salt or sugary sweetness. And I'll put like salt in the side of your tongue. And I'm like, I taste salty. And they had this tongue map you would use. And a lot of people have heard of that. It's totally bogus. It was made up long, long ago by this one German researcher. And very quickly, like, scientists were like, no, that's not how it works. But for some reason, it like got into pop culture. And you see all this like, the tongue map, different parts of your tongue taste different tastes. It's like, no, your whole tongue tastes everything. It's not, there's not zones
like
that taste stuff on
specialized
your
like
tongue.
taste buds or anything like that. Yeah.
I mean, there are different types of receptors that can taste different things, but they're spread out over your whole tongue. It's not like they're concentrated in specific spots where you can only taste that. So just got to get that out of the way. Stop spreading that idea around. Stop showing that in science classrooms. Like, that image just needs to go away because it's totally wrong.
It's kind of like how we still believe carrots are, like you said, how carrots improve your eyesight.
Oh, the whole carrot and night vision myth. Yeah, if you don't know that one, we talked about it. Go back, find that episode. So back to the show. Flavors or sensations, they're all things that we experience with our tongue when we eat. And again, that's what it really comes down to. What the tongue is doing is help us test food out to make sure it's safe to eat. Things that taste bad are often toxic. That's why they taste bad to us, because we've learned through the very hard way that, certain flavors are going to kill us. And it's just hardwired into our brain to go, ooh, that tastes bad. It's like, yeah, because things that taste like that are often poisonous. So our tongues, in a weird way, is a guardian of our bodily health, which is pretty cool.
That's a wild thing to say, but
I know,
cool.
Right? And they're also really good at detecting things that are rare. So your tongue is extra sensitive to salt and sugar and fat, because those are the three hardest things to find in nature, and they're things that our body very badly needs. So our tongue is exquisitely sensitive to detecting them, and we crave them because they're so important. And of course, now that we have like processed food, we fill them with salt and sugar and fat in enormous quantities that would never be possible in nature. And
now I want French fries.
That's gotten us in some trouble, but that's a subject for another episode. So before I kind of wrap up, I can't really talk about the tongue without talking about saliva. So let me go through a few weird saliva facts. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Wild.
Yeah, and we could do a whole deep dive on this, but obviously it lubricates the food. That helps it be more easily pushed down our throat so the tongue can do its job easier. But it also has enzymes in it that actually start to break the food down. And I remember learning that in like, I don't know, middle school or high school or something, and being like, but it's barely in your mouth. Like, seriously, it's about to dump into a vat of acid. Like, what's the point of that? I think part of that is that it has to do with how we taste food. The tongue itself cannot taste food without saliva. So the saliva, those enzymes start to break down just a little bit of that food and get some of those molecules of the food into the saliva. And then that can help transport those molecules into the little receptors on your tongue, your taste buds. So if the saliva wasn't there, you basically would not be able to taste your food. And as we said, tasting food, pretty important.
Super important. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty cool. Another little fun bit is that apparently foods that are sour or carbonated actually increase the amount of saliva you produce. and it could potentially make the food like taste stronger, and definitely makes it easier to swallow. That there've been some research that's shown that like carbonated or sour foods are actually easier to swallow. So it's kind of cool.
That is cool.
And I think we talked a little bit. You just Victoria talked recently about the shrews and how saliva can be venomous, or in the case of things like I think Komodo dragons, things like that, they can actually be so full of like bacteria and stuff
that it breaks
that
things
basically
down.
They can be toxic when they bite other animals and can eventually kill them. So saliva is its own thing, but they work with tongues. So I mean, tongues. Really weird and super important.
So
That's
wild.
what I got this week.
What a weird topic, Kirk.
Yeah. Now I will say,
Thanks.
as I was researching a lot of this, I stumbled upon an article and I'm like, oh my gosh, this article talks about a lot of the things I've already found. And someone else already did a really good deep dive on this. Elizabeth Pinisi wrote a story called Tales of the Tongue in Science Magazine. I highly recommend you seek it out and check it out. She goes into greater detail too, talking about how sort of perhaps even the tongue, we learned how to grab things with our tongue before we learned how to have dexterity with our hands. Like basically the brain's like our ability to do things like write and be so dexterous with our hands may actually be linked to the evolutionary ability of tongues to be so dexterous. She goes in a deep dive on this. It's fascinating. Highly recommend Tales of the Tongue. Check it out. It's not that long a read. But that's what I got for you this week. And Rachel, it's the end of another great week.
Oh, so great. I'm going to be thinking, I'm going to read that article actually, because what? That's wild.
Yeah, go check it out. Yeah, well, happy
Kirk.
2024, I believe, here. Should come out in 2024.
I think so, yeah. We made it.
We got another great and amazing year of stuff coming your way, and I'm excited for next week. Next week is going to be, I already know what my topic is. It's going to be weird.
I know what my topic is, too. We're going to play a game, Kirk.
Oh, I'll see you next week for our game, Rachel.
All right. See y'all next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all of our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star review, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach out to us on social media by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can also check out our website, which is strangebynaturepodcast.com. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.